Well, howdy. I've been breaking out some of my equipment. I'm looking forward to doing a little brewing. I wanted to do a video that's just about brewing, not necessarily on a type of brewing or on a particular recipe. I just wanted to discuss it, kind of give an overview, and tell you what I do to make alcohol in the home. So before we get into this, let's discuss number one, legalities. Is it legal to make alcohol at home? Okay, now it might depend on the state that you live in. I'm talking about the United States, folks. It might depend on the state you live in. Some states have different laws governing the production of alcohol. All right, now I'm not talking distillation. I'm talking about fermentation. All right, the part that's legal for the public. All right, now back after Prohibition, it was made legal not only to drink alcohol, but to make it for yourself. So you could make your own wine if you wanted to. You could make cider if you wanted to. But because the wording wasn't properly done on making that legal, they left out the wording for beer. In other words, beverages that are made from barley and that are, carbonated. And so we had a really cool president that came along. His name was Jimmy Carter, and he legalized the beer making side of it. Okay, so it was, unfortunately, because of wording, it wasn't legal to sell the product or to make beer yourself at home. And so there was this glitch in the law all along. And a lot of people said that, Jimmy Carter did that because his brother Billy was making beer and he didn't want him to get in trouble. Well, maybe that's true. Who cares? Either way, it was a glitch in the law that needed to be ironed out, and it got taken care of. And it is to your benefit. You're allowed to make beer now. I'm going to be making three things in the coming 2 months. I'm going to be making some wine, I'm going to make some cider, and I'm going to make some beer. And these are items that I like to do sometimes seasonally. Like I love cider at Christmas time. That's the reason I broke out all the apple juice, okay? So we're gonna get busy making cider here today, and that'll be a separate video, so stick around, watch that video also. Is it legal to make it? Of course it is. It's legal to make it across the United States, and federal law on their side of it, they limit quantity to 250 gallons per household. That's a lot of hooch, folks, okay? That's a lot of getting drunk. And of course, I'll be honest with you, there's nobody going house to house checking your records to see how much beer you made. So if you made more, I don't think anybody would notice it. Now, if you're making enough of it to sell to the whole countryside, somebody's going to notice that, and they're going to want to know why you didn't go ahead and get licensed and then go through the health department, as well as through the Alcohol Control Bureau of your state. In Texas, that would be TABC. So things like that are quite carefully governed and regulated. That has to do with, you want safe products for the public. You don't want people getting sick on whatever it is you make. So they govern things to make it safe and appropriate. Now, I'll be honest with you, I've never heard of anybody getting sick off of homemade beer. Never once. And if you're wondering why would anybody want to waste their time making homemade beer when you can just go to the store and buy a 6-pack? Okay, so here's what I tell folks, and here's how we're going to boil it down. Have you ever had a loaf of homemade bread? Have you ever tasted homemade bread? Have you noticed the difference in the quality of flavor and mouthfeel between that homemade bread versus something you would buy at the store, which is generally pretty bland and generic? There's a big difference between homemade bread and the store-bought stuff. Big difference. Now, same exact thing with making beer. Also wine and cider and sake and all kinds of goodies. The same principles apply. You get the same improvement in quality and flavor and mouthfeel across the board when you're making beer that you would over a store-bought beer. And I'm serious, the quality is phenomenally different. I love homemade beer way better than anything I can get in the store, and only craft breweries are capable of producing anything close to what I like to produce for myself. So it's rare when I can taste a beer that's commercially produced that I even think is halfway decent, mostly because I have a comparison that's far, far better. Now, I have tasted some homemade beers that were awful, and most of the time when that happened, it was frankly just too many ingredients and too confusing a recipe. When the recipes are kept simple, the flavors are phenomenal. Now, I've got a lot of stuff sitting out here, and I wanted to kind of show you different things and talk to you about different parts of this. I've got 10 bottles of apple juice here. That's 5 gallons. Okay, so that's going to fill this big bottle right here to this lower yellow mark. That's 5-gallon mark. This is 6-gallon mark. I have all of my bottles marked that way because different items are produced in different quantities. A lot of the wine kits, which is what I have here, produce 6 gallons of wine. But a lot of the beer recipes in the United States and other recipes are based on 5-gallon quantities. And that's because a lot of these carboys are 5-gallon bottles, okay? So that's kind of how I think they got started. Now, they do make these in much larger sizes. In fact, this is the smaller one of the big ones that I have. I have big ones that hold like up to 8 gallons. And so they're quite large. And those are great for fermenting really billowy beers. Some beers, when they're fermenting, create this huge foam on top. We call it a creosote. And this billowy, unbelievable foam that develops can blow out through the top of the tank through what we call a fermentation lock if it isn't kept controlled. In other words, given enough space to grow. So yeah, I can fill this whole upper space from this lower line here all the way up with foam, and I've seen that happen. So when you're making beer, that happens. Making wine is generally very stable. I rarely get any kind of foam on top of wine. And wine is fun. It's so easy. I've got a variety of ingredients here, and also I've got some honey. There's so many things that we can turn into alcohol. And folks, making alcohol is as simple as you put yeast with sugar and it's making alcohol. All right, now there is sugar in the apple juice. So when I take this packet right here of high performance ale yeast and put it with this, in one day, it will turn this apple juice from just calm apple juice into a torrent. And if you watch that video of me making cider, you'll see the swirling currents and things that go on inside of these fermenters when you're fermenting. They're very active. There's no guessing if it's happening. You can see it happening, and it's very apparent. Making alcohol, not dangerous, okay? Because what we're making is ethanol, all right? If you take any common sugar that you can eat and combine it with yeast, you get ethanol. That's right, very common thing. We take certain things like grains, what I have here in these buckets. I've got some malted barley right here, and I've got one that's a specialty barley on top here, and I'm going to show you those in just a moment. That way you can get an idea of what they look like. Of course, you know what apple juice looks like. The real trick to choosing your apple juice when you're going to ferment is you look at that bottle. You go right there to the ingredients. It says filtered water, apple juice concentrate, ascorbic acid, which is vitamin C. Okay, now that ascorbic acid, they put it in there as a preservative. But I'll tell you what, it makes a nice tangy cider. It's wonderful. All right, so that's perfect. You don't want any other kind of preservative in there. If it says potassium metabisulfite on there or something like that, then you know it's going to kill the yeast. There's no way it'll ferment. So when you're choosing something to ferment, you have to read that label. Make sure that there isn't a preservative that will work against fermenting. Now, ascorbic acid is a preservative, yes, but we use that all the time in fermenting, and yeast isn't affected by it in any serious way. All right, it just makes for a more tangy beverage. All right, and wines. Now, wine kits, that's what I've got here. This is what I recommend when it comes to making a wine at home. Instead of buying a bunch of grapes and buying a press and pressing your own grapes, That's very hard to do, and it's really hard to know which grapes are going to make good wine unless you've been in the business a while. Because just going out and buying Zinfandel grapes doesn't mean you're going to have a good Zinfandel wine. All right, that just means that you bought a certain type of grape that for that year may be good or bad depending on the harvest. You don't know. Professionals and experts know. And those are the guys that pick out the grapes that go in wines and also go in these boxes. This is just a grape juice concentrate. This right here, if I haven't read the label, but it should make between 5 to 6 gallons of wine. It's probably going to be on the 6-gallon side. So you can see concentrated grape juice right here. And we'll open that up later on when I do the video on how to make wine. So again, if you want to see this happening in real time, then watch my video on that. And that's going to be coming out in a number of weeks. Because folks, it takes weeks to make wine. All right. And the first ferment that goes on is 1 week. And then I rack the liquid in that fermenter to another tank. Racking means siphoning. Okay, so we move the liquid from one tank to another. It helps to separate any particulate matter and finishes off the fermentation. And then we go into bottling, which can be a couple of different things depending on what you're making. When I bottle for cider, I'm going to add a little sugar to it. Some dextrose, which is corn sugar. And that way the yeast has something to eat, and the yeast will eat that sugar and pressurize the bottles. So it'll form a big slug of high pressure carbon dioxide above the liquid in the bottle. That's the reason when you see those bottles, they're not filled all the way to the cap. They needed room for the carbon dioxide on top. Once it's up there, it will, through pressure, push itself down into the liquid, making it carbonated, and it works like a charm. So priming, all right. Now I mentioned earlier honey. Honey, it's what you ferment to make mead. It's one of the oldest beverages ever, mead. Simple honey. And when you're going to make that, you just go through a home brewer's supply, and you're not buying these little bottles. You buy it in bulk, and you get it in buckets, all right, or in other containers, like large bottles. One of the companies I buy malt extract from sells it in a large 2.5-gallon jug. It's 32 pounds of light malt liquid extract. And that's beer making supply. Okay, so whenever you hear malt extract, what that is that's just a sugar extract that was made from the same malt that you make beer with. We'll talk about that in a minute. I'll tell you what, come over this way. Let's look at some of this stuff and you get an idea of what does it take to do home fermenting. It's really not hard. Come over. Now, back over here, I've got, of course, my wine kit and some beer making supplies right here. Now, I don't have everything out here. I don't have the yeast and the hops, but I wanted to show you the base ingredient that's used for making beer. And I'm going to start with this one. This is Brias 6-row malt. Now, generally, there's two different kinds of malt used. It's a 2-row malt or a 6-row malt. And these are the malts that are used to make the beer itself. Okay, so this is what, if you went to a brewery, this is what they start with. Now these grains have already been cracked. They're broken open, okay, and I ran them through a grist mill in order to get this, and it is the way we do the grains right before we put them into hot water to convert starches into sugars. In this product right here, there is two enzymes. They're amylase enzymes, and one of the enzymes breaks the sugar chains or starch chains into shorter pieces. The other one breaks it into actual sugar, into the sugar itself. And so that is how the malt is converted. When you heat it up in water, those enzymes get busy and they convert the starch into sugar. All there is to it. All right, so here we have two little containers, and this is a 6-row malt right here. This is a specialty malt that's used for flavoring beers. So we get different flavors and tones and notes through using toasted malts. This one is called 90 Lava Bond. That's the level of toast that it has. These levels go from, like just 10 lava bond up to, very high numbers, which are very dark roasts, almost the color of coffee actually. In fact, some are even darker. It's called a chocolate roast. All right, so very deep roast and different flavors with each one. And each type of barley that has been roasted equals a different flavor at that roast level. Okay, so in other words, you have 3 different kinds of barley. Each one will taste different roasted to 10 lava bond. All right, and I'll say this, that 10 lava bond is a tasty adjunct. We call these adjunct grains, and it makes flavor. This is one that I use in a brown beer that I make, all right, and it's flat delicious. All right, so these can be converted from the starch to sugar when I'm making beer, and I do that. I do partial conversion brewing when I'm extract brewing, and this is a way of making beer in the home that improves overall quality, the flavor and texture, and it makes, in my view, some of the very best beers you can get. Now what I have here, these are some bags. These are bags of light malt extract. I have 2 different ones here, one that's slightly more amber than the other, which is very light back here. And that one's used for making like pilsners and things like that. I was going to combine these two to just make a light beer. I don't have any liquid malt extract available to me right now, so I'm using the dry. There's a little difference in the strength of the sugar. This is about 20% more concentrate than the liquid malt extract. So it does make, if you use the same amount, it'll make a slightly higher alcohol by volume in the beer if you don't reduce this amount to a lower amount when brewing with it. So in other words, if you have a beer recipe that uses 6 pounds of light malt extract that's liquid, then 5 pounds of this is going to get you to about the same alcohol content as the 6 pounds of the liquid. All right, so it's just about 20% more concentrate. Now, making beer is a matter of, first we convert the starches to sugars, and then we add in the hops and we boil that, and then as we're chilling it down, we add in some more hops that give it a very fine flavor and aroma, and then we bottle that, or put it into the big bottle up here and begin its fermentation by adding yeast to it. So that's how beer making is done. It's a fun process, and I'll be showing how to do extract brewing in the video that I make beer from. I'll also be doing a partial conversion using some of my different grains that I have, and this is just a few. I have a bunch of different kinds of grains for all kinds of flavors and effects, okay? And I'll be using some of those to make this wonderful beer, and I'm absolutely totally looking forward to this. So I'm going to make a version of my brown beer, basically, is what I'm kind of shooting for, which is very sweet and malty and very desirable. Now my wine kit here, these wine kits, folks, they come for the most part complete. You just need your equipment, okay? Brewing equipment's not that expensive. When you get right down to it, you can have a full setup of brewing equipment for between $150 to $200. And when you get into full conversion brewing, that's a little more expensive because you're using, a wort chiller, a lauter tun, and a large pot and boiling equipment. So it turns into a little more of a production. Most people do it outdoors because it produces an aroma that some people don't want in their house. So I'll say that about beer. It does have a stronger aroma when you're making it. Now when you're making wine, it doesn't have any aroma, and the same way with cider. Wine, these kits come with, of course, the extract, the grape juice is what is concentrate. But it also has the yeast in here, and there's probably some clay in here, like dolomite or something like that. There's most likely some isinglass or chitosan. Isinglass and chitosan are chemicals that we put in the wine making at the end that causes the wine to become clear. These extracts come from shellfish. All right, and that's you will never see those products used in a wine that's a Jewish wine. All right, and because of their faith, they will not use anything that has shellfish in it. So those wines are sometimes cloudy, and it is for that reason they're not using those clarifying agents. Now that's kind of old-fashioned, but hey, it's the truth of it. I'm reaching in here, there's all kinds of stuff I'm feeling. So when I open this box up in that show, you guys are going to get the full view of everything that's in it and what you do to make wine. And it's not that hard. I'm going to take this concentrate and pour it into a carboy. We're going to add water to the appropriate level. I'm going to add in the adjuncts, which are like the clay and any other items they may have included in this one. And then we're going to get busy fermenting, because we'll add in the yeast, we'll stir it real well, I'll put a fermentation lock on it, and boom, the next day it's up and fermenting full blast. All right, making alcohol easy. Combine sugar that's in liquid form with yeast and you will get alcohol. Now, talking about alcohol, I know this is important. How much alcohol will I have when I make this? All right, it depends on what you're making. Okay, some things you don't get a choice in, like the apple cider. There is a certain amount of fructose in this apple juice, all right? Once that fructose has been consumed by the yeast, then that's it. That's the amount of alcohol you're going to get out of that, all right? Unless I add extra sugar to it, and I'm not doing that. Now, how do we know how much alcohol? Well, it's simple. When we are first making our product, after we get everything stirred and mixed together, I use what's called a wine thief to reach down into the bottle and extract some of the liquid. And then I place that liquid in this. And then I place this little device right here down inside of that liquid, and it floats. All right? Now, the level that it floats at in the liquid on this scale here will tell you the specific gravity, in other words, the weight of the liquid. Now, after I'm finished fermenting my wine, and once the fermentation is all done, the liquid is going to be lighter, okay? So this thing is going to raise up in the water. The difference in between the first and the second reading tells us how much alcohol by volume is in the product that's been made. This is an item that is used by professionals and amateurs alike. All right, it's a hydrometer, and that tells us alcohol content. It also tells us whether what we're making is identical to a previous batch. If the specific gravity is much different in the original make, then you did something different in creating what you're creating. Maybe you measured something wrong. And that's how we know. So there we have it, all kinds of fermentable goodies sitting out here, and there's more stuff. Folks, you can turn rice into sake. We first mold the rice using a white mold similar to that which you find on cheese. All right, this white mold that we see on cheese, that cheesy smell, okay, that's what the rice will smell like when we're making sake. All right, so sake making, delightful, fun. It's also kind of creepy when you see that bubbling porridge. So we mold the rice, and then we add water and yeast, and we start fermenting the rice. The mold is put in there because rice doesn't have any enzymes that will convert starch to sugar. So we introduce this white mold, this what the Japanese call kojikin, and once we introduce our koji to that rice, it molds, it breaks down those starch chains into fermentable sugars. And that's the whole purpose behind that. So we steam the rice, mold the rice, fill it with water, and then start this process of fermentation. And then we have this kind of beige looking bubbly porridge of rice that absolutely just fills the house with the aroma of cheese. If you don't like the smell of cheese, it might drive you crazy. Right? So, and it, like making other fermentables, takes about 2 weeks. All right, so you have your primary ferment 1 week, then we move the liquid to another fermenter for a second week, and then we bottle. Sometimes we bottle after we treat the liquid so that the yeast is killed, like in the way of winemaking. If I don't kill that yeast, the bottles can explode. That's how champagne is made. They keep the yeast alive and they prime the product and put it in the bottle, and then it pressurizes. And let me tell you, that stuff can get really volatile. Champagne is fun to make, but you need to use the right bottles, and I recommend carbonating them someplace away from people. If they explode, they're scary. Now, I've had bottles explode on me, not the champagne bottles, but I've had beer bottles go kaboom. And trust me, it's very disconcerting. It's quite scary when your bottle explodes. That's just from overpressurization, or sometimes the bottle was weakened. So that's the biggest danger I know of in beer making, is when the pressures build up, sometimes a bottle can go kaboom. And that's the reason we use the right amount of sugar when we bottle. If you use too much sugar, you run into that risk. If you use the correct amount of sugar when you're bottling, then you won't have any problems. Where I ran into a problem is after I stirred the sugar in, I didn't stir it thoroughly enough, and some of that sugar settled toward the bottom of the tank, making some of my bottles over primed, and then they became over pressurized, and one of them went kaboom. The others came out fine, but the beer was extremely fizzy. So you got to be careful how you prime. That's sort of my one over on, this is the beginning of, I'm going to be making some alcohol. We're making 3 different batches of 3 different goodies. So those will be videos that you want to watch. Folks, you can make alcohol at home. It's not that expensive. It's a whole lot of fun. It's a great hobby. And then you end up with a product that's actually better than the very expensive stuff you're out buying at the stores. So if you want to try it, if you've ever wanted to get into this, watch my videos. You're going to really enjoy what happens. Now, I've already got a few beer making videos up. They're older videos, but they contain great information. Take a look at those. That'll give you something to do while I'm making these videos. Folks, thank you very much for watching. Please do me a favor and take a look in my description box right down below this. You're going to see a couple of links there. One is to a company called Wildgrain. They provide sourdough breads and pastas and pastries that come frozen. You put them in your freezer, and when you're ready to have one of them, you just pull it out, throw it in the oven, bake it up, and you've got fresh sourdough anytime you want it. It's really cool. Check that out. Also, there's one for a thermometer. Every chef, every cook, everybody that has a kitchen needs a chef's thermometer. If you don't have one of these little guys, well, ladies and gentlemen, you need one. Go ahead and get this. It's very important. Our food quality is based around temperatures. And if your temperature's right, your quality comes out better, and you can make sure your food is safe and sanitary because you're at the right temperature. Brewing also needs to happen at certain temperatures. And so we take readings of the liquids when we're brewing. Different thermometers will work, but this thing always comes in handy, folks, always. And this particular one has a display that rotates. It can handle getting wet, all right? And it's extremely accurate. You're going to get a read in 1 second. It's going to be within a degree, okay? So I recommend take a look at this. It's definitely worth the very low cost that they offer it for. That's Chef's Temp Thermometers. Please subscribe. Click the like button if you enjoyed this. Drop something in the comments box, recipes, suggestions, whatever you want to put in there. And folks, please have you a good day, all right? Bye-bye.